The real reason why I use so much hardware is a story I've not yet told here on this channel. Here we go. Hey everyone, I'm Cool Caparoon. Thank you so much for stopping by for another video. I truly appreciate you being here. In order for this to make sense, we got to go way back. Way back. 20 years ago, way back. It's 2005. I'm using a Mac G5 computer on a Pro Tools HD3 rig. That's a core card, 2 Excel cards with some HD interfaces. I didn't have a ton of hardware, but I had a couple pieces. The Mac G5 back then had a PowerPC chip in it. They hadn't even switched to Intel yet. But in late 2005, they stopped using PowerPC chips and they started using Intel chips. It was at this moment that none of the plugins that were designed for PowerPC chips could be used on Intel chips. We just saw this happen again a few years ago when Apple switched from the Intel chips to their own silicon, the M1. And none of the plugins that were designed for Intel would work on the M1 chips. So by late 2006 or 2007, plugin companies were done making plugins for the PowerPC chips. There's no point to continue developing plugins for those old chips that weren't going in computers anymore. And so all the new plugins were being developed for Intel chips. And this was back in a time period when plugins, a lot of them didn't sound very good in my opinion, but they were getting better really fast. And so every week some new plugin was coming out that was better than everything that had come out before it. And this was extremely frustrating to me. But back then it wasn't as simple as just buying a new computer. That would be bad enough on its own. And so I would have to buy a whole new rig when this happened, which was just way too much money. So once I could no longer buy plugins that were sounding incredible, that were being newly developed, I decided to start buying some pieces of hardware because I had a ton of plugins, an absolute ton of them that were literally worthless. There were no subscription models back then. I paid cash for all of them. And all of a sudden, all of those purchases were completely worthless. And this annoyed me to no end. And so while this plugin compressor would not transfer to a new rig and I had paid for it, but I was no longer going to be able to use it, I was like, but if I just had the hardware version of it, then I could keep it for the entirety of my career and no one would be able to take that away from me. Not only that, if I decided to sell it one day, as long as I was smart about purchasing it, I could probably sell it for as much as I paid for it or close to what I paid for it. This is a much better business decision. And so I started going after hardware. Now again, we just went through all of this with the M1 chips when Apple switched to the M1 chips. And I know there's going to be a bunch of people out there being like, oh, you should use PC. That's not going to happen. That's a topic for a completely another video. But it's set in my mind that multiple times throughout your career, there's going to be a moment when all of your plugins are worthless, completely worthless. And so when I first switched to the M1 chips, when Mac first switched everything and I switched the whole studio to M1, my workflow didn't change very much because my mix bus was hardware, my drum bus was hardware, my vocal chain was hardware, my kick chain was hardware, my snare chain was hardware, my bus chain was hardware. Yeah, I had to give up a handful of plugins that I really liked when I made that switch, but my sonic abilities, what I was capable of, didn't change at all because the core of my sound is right here in these racks. So that was the thought process behind starting to acquire hardware. But then once I started, this is where things started to change for me philosophically and personally. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that plugins are pointless, that they're worthless, that they don't sound good. I'm not saying that if you mix completely in the box that it's a terrible thing to do. Some of my very favorite mixers mix all in the box. I don't know how they do it, but they do it and they do an incredible job. But for me personally, there are 3 things that hardware do better than plugins. And I think this is pretty universal at this point. The first and most important thing to me, honestly, is the fact that they're always worth what they're worth. I can get money back out of all of this stuff if I decide to stop using it or decide that I want to upgrade or just whatever happens. I can sell all of this and get tons of money for it. You can't do that with plugins. The second thing that I think is real big in hardware, and this is to me, this is a real subtle thing. You may have never noticed this and you may disagree, and that's totally fine. On hardware compression, when the compressor releases, when like the compressor clamps down and then as it's letting go, almost without exception, plug-in compressors have this kind of fuzzy granularity to their release. I don't know why this is the case, but it definitely is the case. As a plug-in compressor has a release, there's something about that that doesn't sound as natural as when a hardware compressor does that. And as someone who uses tons of compression in my mixes, this is a very important thing for me. It's the main reason why I think if you're trying to get into hardware, a mix bus compressor is probably one of the first things you should get. It's a toss-up between that and some mic pre's to mix through, like my signature pre's. So that's the first thing, that release character that hardware does different and, in my opinion, better. At least I like it better. The next thing that it does is on EQ. When you, not a cheap EQ, this doesn't work. I don't even know the defining characteristics of this, but this does not work on budget hardware EQs. But when you get a high quality, really good hardware EQ, and I'm not talking quite SPL PQ $8,000 territory, plenty of hardware EQs have it. All the Cappies do this. My Rupert Neve Design Newtons do this. The SPL Channel 1 does this. When you take the EQ and you start cranking it, specifically in the upper mid-range or the top end, you can get way more out of it before it starts to fall apart and sound bad than you can with a similar plugin. Now, plugin EQs have come a long ways, and I think they are much closer to hardware EQs than the whole compression conversation. But when you are wringing the neck of an EQ, when you are just cranking on it, this is where plugins start to fall apart, and good hardware EQs do not. You know what? I lied. There's 4 things that hardware does better for me than plugins. And the 4th thing is the speed. Now, we can break the speed of using hardware down into 2 categories. One, hardware has a sound, and when you handpick hardware to do a certain thing, that means you have to actually do less processing to get the vocal or the drums or the bass guitar or whatever to sound incredible. You actually do less to it when you're using hardware. So that's the first half of it. The second half of it is that once you're used to turning real knobs, it's so much faster. As long as your setup is streamlined, your patch bays are streamlined, especially if you're using the same signal chains for everything. For instance, I'm using pretty much the same bass guitar chain for every single song. Now, I tweak the settings for every song, but for just about every song, it's the same chain. And just turning back here and actually turning knobs, not clicking with a mouse and watching the knob. No, I put my hand on a knob and I turn it and I feel the difference. And being able to feel the difference in the sound that's coming out the speakers without using your eyes whatsoever, it's just better. For me, it's just better. I can get to a better finished result way faster. So I started getting into hardware because it was an economic decision. No one can take hardware away from me. I mean, aside from my house burning down, that's never going to happen. But there's going to continue to be times where my plugins continue to be worthless. We just went through it 2 or 3 years ago. I bet in another 10 or 15 years, we're going to go through it again. Now, some of you might say, yeah, but it only happens once every 15 years. Yeah, but when you are scraping by, when you're struggling to even make ends meet, having to just all of a sudden re-buy all your stuff, that's a major pain point. But you know what? This compressor is going to sound the same and do the same job 50 years from now. It probably is going to sound better 50 years from now than it does today. And it does not matter what happens with technology, this is still going to be the thing that I chose it for. I'm not saying that anyone needs this much hardware. I'm not trying to convince you to spend money that you don't need to spend. I'm not trying to say that you can't do a great job in the box, because there are tons of great mixers that are doing it in the box. But for me, This is the real reasons why I have so much hardware. And there are links in the description down below for every single piece of hardware that I use. So anytime you guys need any piece of musical gear whatsoever, you can jump on any one of my videos. And once you're on the site, click on any link in the description down below. And then once you're on the site, you can purchase anything that you need, anything that you were gonna buy anyway. And if you do that, it costs you nothing extra, but it goes a huge, huge long ways to help me keep making videos just like this. Those links go to Sweetwater. So huge thank you to you guys for using those links, and a massive thanks to Sweetwater for sponsoring this video. Hope you enjoyed this. Debate it in the comments below. I'm sure this is gonna be a polarizing topic, and there's gonna be a lot of you that disagree, and that's okay. I welcome the disagreements, especially on these kind of topics, because there really is no right and wrong in a subject like this. I just wanted to explain the real reason why I use this much and how I got here. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.